Hey everybody, Dr. Segrin. Today we're going to be doing another virtual lab, and instead of an ed puzzle, you're actually going to record your answers and data in a worksheet that you can download off of the hub. I just wanted to make to kind of show off the app that you're going to be using and how to work it, and basically just kind of run through all the questions to make sure that you understand how to do it. So let's take a look at this worksheet. All right, so this is what the worksheet looks like, and pretty clear directions here. You go to the following website, and I'm making the video tutorial right now, so I'll put the YouTube link here in a second. But we can go to this website, and when you can right-click and say open hyperlink or copy hyperlink and go over to Google. Or you can just, I think, hold Control and click on it, and it will open the link automatically. And what's going to happen is this link will pop up, and you should get something like this. What this is basically a simulation of an ecosystem where you have different populations of organisms. Some are producers, some are herbivores, some are omnivores, and one is a top predator. And basically, we can manipulate this simulation to create different scenarios to look at for food webs. So basically, we can create food webs here on the top left, and then we can plus run and basically simulate like time going by. And we can see what the effect of these food webs are on how these populations interact with one another. And that'll all kind of make sense as we go along. At the initial settings, it says you have 2 organisms living in the ecosystem, 2 plant species. Hit the run button to simulate what will happen to the populations over time and record your observations. So we can go ahead and hit that run button, and you can see that here. And what's going to happen is that basically whatever food web you set up, it's going to be executed. And when we hit run, it's going to simulate time passing, and we'll see what happens. So let's hit run. So in the top right, we can see basically the days are going by. We can go ahead and stop it at day 62. You can let it run for longer, but you can kind of get the point of what happened. And what we realized is that the 2 colors that were on this visual represented the 2 different species that we started with. So we had 2 different plants, the green one and the blue one. And what we noticed is that over time, the green one took over, and basically we don't see any blue one anymore. And this is also summarized in this data table. At first, we had 5,000 of plant B, that was the blue one, and we had 5,000 of plant A, that was the green one. And then over time, as the days went by, the green one, plant A, grew more and more and became more and more dominant, and the blue one got less and less and disappeared eventually, which is where it is now. So as you're doing your worksheet right now, you could go ahead and write down, well, what did you notice? Basically repeat what I just said. The green went up, the blue went down, yada, yada, and explain why you think this happened. What is the relationship between the 2 plants? So what's happening? Why is the green plant taking over and the blue plant dying out? What do you think's going on here? And then that takes us to, there's a reset button here that we can click, and that will reset our community and our graph, and it'll take us back to day 0 with our initial setup. So as later on, you're going to be having to build your own scenarios, and you're going to have to use that reset button to reset it each time. So click the reset button, click on the snail icon and assign it to eat plant A, and then click run again. So this time we're going to add a new layer to this food web. So we're going to click on the snail, and we're going to say the snail, we have the option of saying it eats plant A or it eats plant B. So we're going to say it eats plant A. And now you can see there's a little food web that's showing up here on our top left. In our top right, in our little diagram of the ecosystem now, we can see some little snail icons. So that's to simulate that there's some snails around in this ecosystem. And once again, we can hit run. You can see some wild stuff happens. Oh. All right. So it looks pretty stable now. I would recommend basically letting each of your simulations run until they appear to be stable. We could see that initially there was some really wild fluctuations going on. We began seeing something similar happening as our first scenario where we didn't have the snail, where we saw plant A began growing in abundance. So plant A is the green line. We can see it started going up. It went from 5,000 to 5,250, but then it kind of leveled off and crashed down. And plant B, the blue plant, began decreasing like it was in the first scenario. But after a few days, then it started increasing in order. And so we see these kind of weird oscillations going on where there's a fluctuation. And if you watched the last video about energy and ecosystems, we talked about predator-prey relationships, and we kind of looked at some of these graphs, and that is part of what is going on in population. And one way to kind of visualize this relationship is with this graph. This is a pretty standard predator-prey graph, and we can start at really any point, but let's say we're starting here at the top. So here is a point. Blue line is rabbits, the orange line is wolves. So right here we have lots and lots of rabbits, right? So this is representative of how many rabbits are in the population. So in this zone here we have lots and lots of rabbits. If you look down at the bottom, we don't have very many wolves, but because there's so many rabbits now, the tendency is that the wolf population is going to increase over time. As the wolf population gets really, really high, now all these wolves are eating all these rabbits, and that's going to tend to push the rabbit population down, and et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of how it goes back and forth with this relationship. And that is something that you have to interpret. Our next question is going to be basically, what happened and why do you think it happened? That's what you would write down here, there. And so once you get to this point, now the rest of the lab is basically you get to set up 3 of your own scenarios, and it really, you can pick and choose whatever you want. And this is the reason why I did not do an ed puzzle this time, is because I want you to manipulate the food webs yourself, create whatever wacky scenarios you want to, and then hit run and see what happens, and then try to explain the patterns that you observed. So it really doesn't matter what scenario you pick. You just have to run 3 different scenarios and then hit run and write down your setup and results and your explanation of why you think it happened. So instead of actually detailing your setup and results, so instead of me having to describe everything about the food web that you set up, instead I want you to take a print screen of what's going on. So I will walk through the process of how to do that again. Your print screen is going to be, so let's say hypothetically I've set up another, some more organisms. So let's say I say the deer eats plant B, and I create a plant C in here, and I say the rabbit also eats plant A, and then the squirrel eats the snail, and that's a raccoon eats the snail as well. Whatever, you can get as wacky as you want with it, right? And then the wolf eats the rabbit and the deer and the squirrel and the raccoon. It's just gonna eat everything. So now we have all this crazy stuff. I have a very complicated food web going on here. Oh, maybe I should have the squirrel eating the tree. This is actually probably pretty realistic of a food web. You don't have to go that complicated, but you can make it as complicated as you want. And then I hit reset and I hit run again. And we see all the different populations and how they change over time and see if it ends up being stable. We see the wolf running around eating things. Looks like a couple things have already crashed, but we're reaching some level of stability after a while. Pretty cool. So let's say you get to this point. This is when you should take a print screen, because this print screen would show your setup, your food web, and then it would show your results, which is basically your graph. And to do a print screen on the normal computer that HISD assigns, it's going to be, you're going to hit the FN button which is a whitish button. It says FN and there's a box around it, and that's at the bottom left corner of your keyboard. And you're going to hit the insert PRTSC button, and there's a little box around PRTSC at the top right of your screen. So you're going to hit both of those at the same time. So I'm holding both of those down at the same time, FN and PRTSC. And then I'm going back to my document, and here you can just right click and you want to put the picture in, paste the picture. I'll do that again. It's going to be a right click, and then you see paste options, and you're going to do picture. You can also do Control and V at the same time, and that will also paste it. And if you want to crop it, you can, but you don't have to. So that's perfectly acceptable. Those are your results. Then you explain what happens. Well, keep in mind, the more complicated you make it, the harder it is going to explain exactly what happened and why it happened. But it seems to be in this particular scenario, plant C, our tree, got completely annihilated by the squirrels, and I guess the wolf couldn't eat enough squirrels to keep that population in check. So our squirrel population kind of ran amok, and then after the trees died, the squirrel population seemed to have died off. I don't see any more squirrels. So it seems like the plant C and the squirrels both crashed, but everything else ended up making it in our population. I think rabbits and snails and deer and wolves and the plants are all still here. All right, so that was almost stable, but not quite. The tree and the squirrel population ended up crashing. And then move on and do another scenario. So you're going to come back to your little lab. You're going to hit reset. If you ever want to completely reset your food web, you can hit the presets button, and it will erase everything about your food web, and then you can rebuild it in however different ways you want. And so you can challenge yourself to try to assemble the most complicated food web you can, where everything survives. You can try to make realistic food webs. You can try to build it slowly to see what each level of the food web's effect is on the different populations. It's up to you. You experiment, tinker with it, form your own hypothesis. And again, this is getting back to the root of science. Science is about learning something that's new. It's okay to not know what's going to happen. And your job as a scientist is to interpret the results and try to make sense of the data. So that is what this lab is all about. And I think with that little explanation, you should be able to do everything. The very end says write a little paragraph explaining why food webs are important, why each organism in an ecosystem, any ecosystem, is important. And you can also talk about the question of which food webs were the most stable and which one, the ones with few organisms or the ones where you put a lot of different things in it. So as you made the food web more complicated with more lines and more attachments, did it seem to make it more stable? Everything survived, everything was balanced, or did it make it less stable? Everything died off. All righty, that is the lab. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to just message me. I'll be happy to answer those for you. See ya.